Okay, so thank you very much, Richard, and thank you to Digital Northampton for having us today. Thank you to everybody for joining us. Just a bit of an intro to Perry and myself. So I'm Kirsten Buck, I'm Chief Impact Officer at Pthr. My role centres around measuring the impact we have with our clients, also looking at the wider community and sustainability as being at the core of our activities. And Perry is founder and Chief Energy Officer at Pthr. He is 2 times author, a TEDx speaker, LinkedIn learning instructor, and has been cited on HR Weekly's Most Influential People in HR list 4 times running. I make it, just to name a few of his accolades. So Pthr was founded in 2012. By 2019, we were a team of 3, and at the turn of 2020, we were a team of 8, which wasn't great timing for the pandemic. However, we're really grateful to still be here. We have a wide variety of skills and backgrounds at Pthr, but we're really connected by what we believe in, which is better business for a better world. We like to think of ourselves as business activists and conscious citizens, and really that we practice what we preach. And that can be shown through the fact that we have a gold status as a 4-day working week employer, an accredited living wage employer, and we also have our B Corporation application pending. So we really hope that we can add that at some point this year. And why are we qualified to be talking to you about hybrid working today? Our primary reason and activity when we work with clients is through organization design. And this is looking at people-powered change through agile and autonomous ways of working, through design systems thinking, and also really considering more conscious business models and strategies. And we believe that hybrid working is one of those ways of being. Thank you, Perry. And if we go back to the beginning of 2020, we were conducting most of our work in person, so through events and workshops in client premises. So we had to take a massive pivot and think, how do we make ourselves relevant? So we spent a lot of 2020 creating our business reinvention labs, and these tend to be 3-hour-long, really immersive simulator environments centered around our 3 areas of expertise, so people, profession, and process. And the hybrid lab fits into the profession area, but we're also going to be incorporating our agile lab today, so you've got 2 for the price of 1. And just to give you an idea of the types of clients we work with, there's a broad range there. So private and public sector, we really like working with not-for-profits as well, and it can be anything from startups to multinationals. So what have we seen in the last year? So we've seen sort of initial praise for virtual working, the flexibility it can bring, the reduction in hours spent commuting. But then as this has become the norm, I think we've seen a bit of a backlash with things like Zoom fatigue, and then also a concern for missing the social aspects of office working. It's a pretty divisive topic. So we've got companies like PwC now declaring that people can work flexibly, but then Goldman Sachs, on the other hand, saying that all bankers will return to the office. And it's only today that we've seen this headline that no full-time return to the office for over 1 million. And I think it's the majority of companies the BBC surveyed will be embracing hybrid working. So hybrid working is being considered, and how do we best go about this? Now, just before I pass over to Perry, there's only one thing he's asked me to say today, and that is that he's a proud Northamptonian and a Cobblers fan. So over to you, Perry.
Thank you, Kirsten. Yeah, so a shame that Northampton couldn't continue their League One status, but once a cobbler, always a cobbler. Yeah, as Kirsten said, the landscape of work has quite radically shifted. And as Richard started and opened this time last year, we probably thought we'd had to sit out for a couple of months, and then we kept having these kind of peaks and dives with pandemic responses, to the point that we're still now in a restrictive situation, and we're starting to emerge, and some businesses are starting to open with very different conditions and look and feel. But during 2020, this kind of diagram and schematic, I think, kind of outlined that actually things have actually been quite simple during lockdown, as in, if you can, you work from home. If you can't, there's a reason, and that's all about the proximity of you to people, who you look after and serve, the proximity to vehicles, equipment, and so on. But for those people who work in knowledge-based work and are largely sat at desks, this is now the landscape we're operating in. It is far more complex. It either used to be occasional working from home and more regularized working in office settings. And as Kirsten says, that was the nature of our rhythm too. During lockdown, we kind of had that choice taken away. So it's actually quite simple to just say you work from home. Now we're emerging, now actually this kind of choice dynamic, I think, is presented to us. So CBRE put this out to pretty much say the choices now are multiple, and the derivation of those choices is now coming from individuals' experiences during lockdown, whether that's good or indifferent, and whether they miss the social connection or really like the deep working they can get done from home. We do hear about the lack of separation from home and work, and where people's commutes were actually a time when they did their thinking, even if they were on a packed train. So it's funny what we kind of miss when it gets taken away from us, but make no bones about it, we are in a more complex situation now than we were before, as we start to think, what is the future and what is this hybrid option that lots of people are talking about? We think it's actually a way of trying to return back to try and simplifying a little bit more about, well, what is work? And so a hybrid organization is how we like to talk about it, not necessarily just hybrid working, but that you reinvent yourself as a hybrid organization. You say, we're committed to the principles of hybrid working and all that comes with it. And I think these three elements, I think, are pretty helpful in creating that new starting point for you, a kind of reset, I suppose. This comes from the work of Neil Usher, who's been in the property world for about 20 years, largely in the corporate side of things, and was responsible for the production and build of Sky Central, their brand new headquarters for both broadcasting and for their media workers. So Neil knows a thing or two about workspace. And he says, actually, the space is almost like the last part of your equation, because you need to start with thinking about people and culture. Well, who and how do we do what we do? So who comes, what do they come for? What's the general sort of makeup and climate of our organization, irrespective of where we are? And that's all connected by your process and tech. So what we do and what we use to do it, those are really important things. And I suppose we've gotten used to rewiring things that we used to do in person and done through screens and asynchronous chats and shared videos. Those things wouldn't have happened as a part of your process routine had we not become dispersed. And then the place does come into the mix, of course, where we do what we do. And increasingly, that's what's being questioned. And the news clips that Kirsten talked about are an exemplification of that, that lots of people are now thinking very differently about what is the place, what is it there for, and what do we do with it. So we've tried to think about how we can start to look at the world of work from the what was to and what to be. And this was partly the previous model. And so the reason you've got a little black box that's leaning towards traditional synchronous working is because that's what it looked like if you were in an office environment. That picture might look a little bit dystopian because there's lots of people with headphones on, there's not much socializing going on, but largely you had a workstation, you came to it, you logged in, you did your stuff, and then you went somewhere else. And I often wondered when I walked into client spaces with people deliberately zoning out through headphones and so on, why are they even here? Why have they ritualistically traveled somewhere to do something they could very potentially do from anywhere? But that was the model, mostly traditional synchronous, and exceptions happened in this distributed asynchronous method. And that could be sales representatives who are on the go, people who spend lots of time with clients and communities, people who had the opportunity to work from home because they needed some space and time and lack of interference and so on. So it was an exception. That's what we used to have. But I think this is how we...
Just to stop you quick, there's just a little bit of background beeping on the microphone, I think. Kirsten just picked it up. Yeah, I don't know if it's not too bad, but I just don't know whether there's anything you can just tweak on it.
Okay, let me have a quick look. I might have to just take it off full screen and just do a little bit of seeing what's going on with this, because I do sometimes get a bit of interference, but it's irregular, so I don't know why. Let me just have a look. Sound settings. Right.
It was fine at the start. Never heard anything at the start.
Right. Okay. Is that any better now, or can you still hear it?
Just a bit of chirping. when you
a
speak.
bit of chirping.
Yeah.
I don't know whether it's anything to do with that little microphone thing, so let me try and move that. Is that any better? Does that work? How's that?
Yeah, you can't really hear you then.
Can't hear me at all then?
It just goes a bit quiet then when you move the microphone away.
How's that now?
Yeah, you can hear you, but it's still there, I think.
Hang on a minute, I'll tell you what, let me just drop it completely and just go with the on device. Right, how's that? Better?
Yeah, I don't think it's quite as clear. Go speak once more. Are you there, Perry?
I think you might have dropped out, Perry, for me.
This is one of the joys of virtual working, I guess. Should we just give him a couple of minutes, Richard?
Yeah.
Yeah,
No worries. We're not going anywhere.
it's nice to see everybody connecting in the chat anyway, in the meantime.
Yeah, got people from Scotland, Cumbria. Brilliant. Just you now, Kirsten.
It is. So yeah, if you just wait a couple of minutes, if he doesn't come back, I can pick up the presentation.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, if anybody wants to put any questions into the chat or any comments in the meantime. Yeah, Steve, when you say that you struggled with staff working at home, what were those, what sort of struggles?
Do you work from home then, Richard?
Yeah, we did for a while, but yeah, come back into the office now. We were at the council, we were part of the whole COVID response initially, so we were in the building quite a bit, and then it's only really recently that we were sent home, but yeah, keen to get back in really. It's a nice big office that we've got in the town centre. Yeah, no worries, Perry. He's going to restart.
So this has actually never happened on an event we've been on before. So yeah, I'm really sorry about this.
No worries. These are the technical difficulties.
Yes, so I see that Sue's asked a question there which I can speak to actually. So all around social connections. So at Pthr, we're a small team, there's 8 of us, but we've actually only met in person once. And there's a couple of team members who we've never met in person. So we've established practices to create this sense of belonging, which I will cover later in the presentation, which I hope is helpful. But we do believe it is something that we can do if there's certain practices in place.
Do you have an office at all, Kirsten, or is it everything remote now?
No, we don't. So one of my colleagues is based in Romania. I'm at the moment based in London, but I'm going to be moving back to Scotland, and then the rest of us are dotted around England. So yeah, we're all virtual and geographically dispersed. So before COVID, we would have met in sort of co-working spaces that we were talking about before, Richard.
Yeah.
But we're fairly committed to our virtual way of working at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, that's a question for any attendees, if you want to put in the chat, whether anyone is interested in co-working spaces or whether you use co-working spaces at the minute, whether that's something that you might look at more. Right, Perry's back.
He's back. Okay, good. I was just about to load up the presentation, actually.
Promote him to panelist. Perry, you're back. I'm going to make you a co-host.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, never tinker with your sound stuff while you're in presentation. There's a big lesson.
That sounds better than Perry. That's good.
That's all right. Okay. Well, at least that's got rid of that little interference, even though it was a little bit of a break. Right. I just got onto this, hadn't I? Traditional synchronous and asynchronous stuff. So yeah, that's how it was. And then I got on to, or was just about to go on to, perhaps this kind of third dimension we need to think about. It isn't just an either or. And actually, we probably need to make our thinking about a hybrid organization a bit more three-dimensional rather than just in or out. And the way to look at that is, what did you do when it was in, and what were the needs that you were fulfilling when you were in, and what were you doing and what were the needs being fulfilled when you were out, and what is almost like the combination or the variation within that. So you stop thinking about it as a linear either in or out, and you start thinking about it from a different perspective. The people and culture, process and tech, and then place comes into it with, I think, a very different dimension. So I think what we're seeing is that where people are talking about a hybrid option, a hybrid by design, they are talking about workplaces for more occasional visits. And the essence, I think, is what I've got on this slide here. It's about largely unstructured work, where remote working isn't suitable for that. Remote working seems to work incredibly well with scheduled, task-based activities, thoughtful stuff. And as an example, I had a former client who, somebody there was telling me that they were starting to think about the hybrid model and thinking about working from home on a Monday and a Friday and coming into the office on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And the leadership instruction was, so that's when you can do your meetings on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And people instantly said, no, if we're coming in, we don't want to be doing stuff that we've got used to doing through screens that we could do at the other end of the week. So we want to come in and do the creative stuff, the social stuff, the more collaborative stuff that you just can't do through a screen. So I think we've got some real opportunities, I guess, but also some tensions to solve within that. So what I've said in that is, like, avoid a mix of some people dialing in virtually and some people being in a room. I've got 20 years experience of working remotely, and I was often the only person on a screen or on one of those starfish phones, and you might as well not be there because the dynamic in the room is totally about the people there, and you're an afterthought, and it's really difficult. I did see a potential schematic from Google's new Plex out in California, where they're going to have circular meeting rooms with massive screens for people to dial into, so that actually it's really obvious that you're present. But we don't all have that luxury of Google's capital and Google's ability to change the estate that way. So if you're going to meet, do it in person or do it virtually. Don't have a mix. It's a potential disaster, really. And so, yeah, so I think we've now got to think about this third dimension, this hybrid by design kind of option. I think that's what we've got to start considering as something to focus on, not just either or. And our approach to this is that the team is the unit of design. So Nationwide Building Society said, brilliant, all 13,000 people work where you want. And that sounds lovely in terms of choice, but actually, can you then imagine either a stampede on a Tuesday, because everybody wants to come in on a Tuesday, ghost town on a Friday, people turning up with absolutely no space to work because there's no coordination. So the temptation would be that HR goes, I know what to do. Let's have a spreadsheet and a rota and a booking system. Well, you've just brought in a whole load of bureaucracy that you could probably avoid. And I think the way you avoid this is you don't take an organizational edict and you don't leave it completely open to individual choice, but you get teams to craft what they need, when they need, and where they need it. And then teams who work with teams also collaborate. I think that's the most sensible model in terms of trying to deploy a hybrid working approach. So here's an example on this. And Kirsten, I think you were particularly sort of keen to bring in the sort of lifestyle choices and realizations that people have had. So I don't know whether you want to kind of lead into that on this particular slide.
Sure, I can do, Perry. Yeah, it was more just, I think that now, having been through this experiment in digital dispersed working, it's a good time to really workforce plan, taking into account life considerations. So I'm a working mom. So from a working mom perspective, it'd be really good to form teams of working moms, because there's a better way to establish rhythms that work for them. And especially given the statistics around COVID, that women have been most adversely affected by the pandemic. And just to give an example of that, in the US in December alone, 100,000 jobs were lost by women, 16,000 jobs were created in the same period, but these were actually given to men. So yeah, I think it's time to really consider these life choices and considerations so that we find a way of hybrid working that works for different groups.
Yeah, so I think that example brilliantly brings in what was previously a fringe or marginal activity or even an unspoken aspiration and bring it onto the table now and actually say, look, I've got a chance to craft a better life and work balance, but I need to do that in harmony with the other people who I work with and who rely on me. And I perhaps still do need to be part of those social exchanges. So let's work out how we can model that as a team. So here's an example, Team Alpha. They decide as a team that Mondays and Fridays are brilliant for them because they work on projects a lot. They can start their week by planning the week. They can do some creativity, some learning and mentoring, non-standard working, knowing that the rest of the week they're content to do it all from either a third space or home, because that's when they'll do the research and craft their designs and whatever it might be. And then come together on a Friday again to review it, praise each other on the week, do a team learning session, some networking, and even do some of that social cohesion that I guess a lot of us are starting to look forward to as a result of exiting from lockdown. So that's Team Alpha. And then you've got Team Beta, who work in the same organization as them, who have a different set of needs. And so they actually say, well, we want to do all the front end work of the week remotely. And then we want to do the stuff that involves more socialized activities in the office on a Friday and a Thursday. Now, if Team Alpha and Team Beta have to work together sometimes, they now know that if they need cohesive social stuff, Friday's the day, because they're all in on a Friday. And then they know that they can program check-ins and catch-ups and meetings online in that Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday period, a bit like the example I gave earlier on. So you can see that's actually a much more coherent way of doing it, rather than people randomly pulling the thing apart, having it in their own directions. So between what Kirsten's talking about as an aspiration for a carer and a working parent, you can still get a really good harmony of in, out, or otherwise, and set your own model at a kind of team level. So yeah, so I think there's something interesting and important about this, that teams as a unit to decide is kind of really starting to come through our thinking of how you design this for effectiveness. Now, this model comes from a number of different concepts, so systems theory and complexity in the world of networking, and was developed in the early 2000s at IBM. Dave Snowden and a colleague of his started to put together a bit of a landscape for how they were dealing with chaotic issues where clients needed rapid sort of responses to complex issues of really challenging, tricky issues, complicated stuff where you need to interpret loads of data and you have lots of things to kind of sequence and splice, and then really clear, repetitive best practice stuff. And so they mapped it out into this framework called Cynefin. So it's a Welsh word, loosely meaning habitat, but it kind of orients you to where you are. And so if we use COVID as an example, actually, initially it was chaotic. We just had to do stuff. We didn't even have time to think about it. Shut the office, take your chair home. It was all very quick action. And only once we'd done it, did we then start thinking, well, how's it going? Are you working off the corner of your bedside table, or, you know? And so we did it, and then we started to make sense of it in order to create some responses to improve that situation. Now, the thing about chaos is absolutely you need to do that, you need to act, but if you're continually in a chaotic state, it's pretty exhausting for us and can be quite impairing on our ability to perform well. So you can see that we probably shifted then quite naturally into the complex area. We still didn't know everything about home working. We still didn't know whether a board could make a decision on a merger and acquisition all through a camera. But we started to probe how we do that. We kind of built the essence of it and we put it into action and again adjusted and responded. So this framework quite literally says, in order to make the decisions that work for you, it really helps to know where you are and what the influencing factors are and whether you need to experiment, analyze, act, or whatever it is that kind of sets your course of direction. And I think we're going to spend a lot of time in complex and complicated. We're going to have lots of data about people's preferences and trends and performance and peaks, troughs and well-being and all that. So I think complicated and complex, we're going to be ping-ponging through those two, probably for about the next couple of years while we settle into what that hybrid concept really does mean and really actually delivers for us. And connected to it is this word agile. I still hear lots of people saying, yes, we work in an agile way. I expect to see them having stand-ups with scrum boards, and what they really mean is they hot desk. So for some people, remote working or hybrid is actually not even a term they recognise. They call it agile working. Now, it kind of is, because there's choice and fluidity and flexibility and so on, but really it's still about, are you working flexibly, remotely, and are you being responsive and strategizing in that sort of intuitive and dare I say it, sort of regularly incremental sense. And it can also mean those development rituals that we see in Agile: iterative, small bursts, test, learn, review, and adapt. And I think actually the sort of COVID hybrid experiment, I think, is going to need a lot of this, because I think we will need to see, has the team got the right construct? Are we making use of the space when we're there in all the ways that actually adds value? Or are we just returning to normal ritualistic type things, and it's not really creating the difference that we want it to? So I think agile approaches of small bursts, experiment, evidence, adapt, I think that's really where this comes into its own as a kind of hybrid approach to knowing more about how we work. And of course, this comes from the software world. So it was all about interactions, test and learn concepts, collaborating with people more actively, and being more responsive to change, but having a very clear set of parameters to work within. So it's no strange incident, this. It's not just occurred overnight. Because I think if we look at work, it is these two things: productivity, and then what's called stratification. So it's process efficiency, resource utilization, and we're currently sweating those about working from home. You see a lot of people saying, actually, we've been about 40% more productive. And then you see people say, well, yeah, but actually, we've also put in about 20% more time. So what we sort of gained by not commuting, we've got like a 6 to 8 p.m. kind of window that we just sat at our screens doing work, because what else could we do? So we could be looking at some false sense of productivity and some perhaps impairing systems of non-separation between life and work. But anyway, productivity aims to do that. And then in the stratification sense, we've got these categorized levels and social systems. They've all pretty much been sort of thrown out the window during COVID, because, you know, it's the hierarchical sort of decision-making processes and so on are still there. But we are on our own, sat in a room doing stuff. And so actually we don't even feel like we're part of that collaborative network. But these two forces will help us shape what comes out of it, because you know, we need that combination of systems and efficiencies, but also the human social elements to it. And Agile's definitely looked at that as a concept. And so I guess in response to that, Harvard Business Review last year pretty much said, look, Agile's the way now, because, you know, we've got this, look, they've even got the word chaotic and static in it. They've recognized that you kind of move along it as you've got incidents. But the static side of things is probably the least likely place to find yourself. So we need more leadership agility, process agility, strategic agility. So they've kind of nicked the agile principles and they've kind of put them into play for a non-software development kind of world. And I think, again, we'll see this. I think we'll see much more responsiveness and these short bursts of insight-led change. So if you're a leader that really gets agility, good luck, and you know, well done. If you're not, then I think there's a fast learning curve to get onto. But again, I just wanted to put this up to sort of say this is nothing new. We have been working on socio and I guess you'd say sort of process efficiency for a long, long time. So going back to 1851, we knew work had social elements. And then through both engineering and then social science and psychology, we've kind of tinkered and adapted how people interact and what they need to do to process their work efficiently. And some of that is now starting to dawn, that actually we've paid too much attention to process and not much attention to things like social cohesion. And now they're starting to tax us. Now we're going, how do we bond? How do we create the culture? How do you overhear and learn? And we've sort of denied all those factors for a long time because we've all just rocked up at the same place. But if you follow this pattern, there are clues everywhere about how we interact, how we make a good combination of human spirit and professional efficiency. So yeah, when you get these slides, you might add a few books to your reading list, which is no bad thing. But a few things to put into play for your hybrid kind of strategy. I think we need a set of principles for this. I think A plan and a strategy is great, but I think people kind of need some founding principles that perhaps detach from what was and can create a new sense of stabilizing and guiding forces. So rather than rules and really hard and fast direction, I think some of the principles that adopt can come into play. And certainly Kirsten will back me up on this. The principle of working out loud is quite literally where you stop your work being in an inbox or stuck in some workflow, and you socialize it and make it accessible so people can see what you're doing, what you're up to, how they can help, where there's log jams. And again, this is a principle from Agile that works really well with Agile teams on Scrum boards. Everybody knows who's doing what, everybody can help, everybody can kind of swarm to an issue or a problem. And I think we need to see more of that, because if we're not in physical proximity, we might not be able to have those conversations and look at somebody who looks a bit like they're struggling, whether we can help. So I think we compensate for that by being more of a sort of displayed nature of what our work is. But equally, I think we've got this brilliant opportunity where people can say, look, if I'm working from home as part of our hybrid system, this is where I want to do this deep, thoughtful work. Because if I come in, I'm distracted and it's nice and friendly, but I want to really sink myself in a piece of work. So again, I think we could be looking at adopting some of those principles that perhaps have been denied of people in the past. And this could see some really, really nice shifts in how people can attach to their work through those different lenses, socialized work and perhaps more complex, deep work. And then I think what's important, and I've seen it during the sort of COVID experiment, I suppose you'd say, of remote working, is that we need punctuation. Because if we just open the laptop lid and just work right through and shut it, we're often like, what did I do today? There's no sense of accomplishment, because it's just been this mush of meetings and email responses and Slack posts and so on. So what we advocate is that you really do have a kind of a hard break or a sort of a multiple set of little review points in your day that just helps you understand what you've accomplished, what you've achieved. Because as I said in the slide there, otherwise you get this monotonous hum of never finished work, and that's not good for anybody. Sprint-based approaches give you that. So even if you just think about a kind of day sprint breakup, you get the chance to see how much progress you're making. And then these whole kind of show and tell, prototype, iteration side of things, again, I think is another way of really nicely socializing our work. So Agile's got a lot to offer in the way we work in a hybrid sense, whether we adopt post-it notes and sprints, or whether we just adopt some of these principles. And clearly Harvard have got the bug on this, because they've published another article about working from home and office time. The reason I wanted to highlight this is I really like what they've done here, because we're really hot at the moment on work sizing. How many hours does it take you to get a project from where it is to where it needs to be? And I like what Harvard have done here. They've allocated hours to stuff that you can do in or out of a particular social working setting. So that the interviews, brainstorms, and so on is that let's come together to do that. And then that I need to research it, draft it. Well, let's do that when we're dispersed. And it kind of feels almost too simplistic. But I think it's in our gift to start thinking about whether we can segment work based on place, nature, personal preference, and so on. So I really like what they've done here. And again, this principle comes from Agile. They've taken the whole, let's size the work, whether it's t-shirt sizes, points, voting dots, or hours. I think there's a number of clues in the Agile trail to follow for that. So here's an example of it. Know where it sits. Is your work chaotic, complex, complicated, or simple? And if it's simple, it fits a certain category. If it's chaotic, that probably needs a bit of action, social orientation. And so you could start to introduce things like Pomodoro techniques. Let's do 25 minutes when we're working on low sort of mental agility, high volume stuff, and then make sure we have a break and then come back to it with fresh and variety sort of approaches. Because I can imagine if you're a dispersed call center worker now, just picking up call after call after call, the end of the day mush in your brain mustn't be very rewarding. So this is a way you could start to think about keeping optimal levels of focus and concentration. And then if it's challenging and complicated, break it down, journal some of your approaches, start thinking about how you can involve others. So again, I think we can turn this over to the team and go, let's create a new cadence, a new rhythm, a new flow, a new approach. And it's the IKEA effect, I think, is when we build something, we tend to love it and regard it a bit more. If we impose all this hybrid stuff on people, we might be in trouble. And then the other thing I wanted to sort of leave you with on hybrid is, you know, you just need to think about enough. What's enough to start experimenting with patterns and approaches? Do we need a blanket approach, or can we iterate this out? Choose some topics perhaps that validate place-based, see how they go. So just get enough. I mean, I don't think there's anybody saying that what you set in motion perhaps after the 20th of June has to continue for the rest of the year. You can start with that, review it in July, adapt it and keep going. So I think there's definitely something about that iteration, and definitely something about involving people's feelings and, I guess, experiences, as well as outputs, productivity and so on. So I think there's a combination of data points to get here. So really include people to share, how is this for me in the work, and what are we doing, and how effective is that? I quite like the fact that we'll all be sort of co-creating, I guess, our own sort of domains of work. And then share that with other teams who are doing similar or different work, and just go, we found this and we do this. So I think now's the time to be generous with what you reveal rather than sort of protective. So yeah, I think a collective effort like that could help you really get this right quicker than perhaps just edict, blanket, just make it work. And we've got a model that we think helps you do a bit of the diagnostic on how people feel and how your systems are. So we deliberately crafted this during the sort of COVID experience, I suppose, because a lot of factors were being bandied around and it was getting very complicated about how you make decisions. We wanted to start from the point that people and the organisation need to flourish. And so on the right-hand side, that's what we want to see happen. The systems you deploy and the energy people give gets you there, but all these factors in the middle are perhaps where it's stuttering, it maybe is not quite so slick, it may be a little bit overemphasized and underemphasized in some areas. So we're using this model a lot with clients now, where we're going, where's your kind of weak point? Where's it not clicking into place? And if it's something like recognition, because I'm so distant, I don't get any thanks or reward or feedback, then we can go back to the left and say, are we being clear enough about what we're expecting from people? Are there lines of accountability that we need to reset? Because what we want is people to appreciate when they're doing a good job, but also appreciate where they might need to crank it up a bit. So some of that is in design and principles, but it may just be that you can solve your problem without having wide-scale systemic change. So we think this is perhaps another tool that people can use when they're starting to unpack the hybrid experience and their strategies. So just a reminder, third dimension, it's not either or, it's not just in or out, it's actually what's best, and how do we engineer that at team level for cohesion and harmony and spirit. So thanks to Neil Usher and people in the property world who think beyond assets and bricks and design and actually think about the people and the psychology of what it means to be in a place and how to optimize it. And that's it from us. So there's the team. Our details are over there on the right if you want to get in touch with us and find out more. We're not difficult to find. And as Kirsten said, we're all pretty active and we all enjoy getting involved in challenging prospects for clients and partners. So I'll stop sharing there and see what we've got in terms of the question bank, Richard. So we've got 15, 16 minutes.
Fantastic, Perry. Yeah, some really, really good points you're making there. Some of the things you're making, I'm just thinking of my own work and how we work. And we've just gone through a really large project at the council in terms of implementing 2 new unitary websites. We used a company called FutureGov. Right. So we never met them. They were based all around the world. Everything was virtual, but it was like a really intense project for 6 months. And that was, very agile. But yeah, it was very much meetings every day, getting the work done. But yeah, the stand-ups, the retros, those kind of things. And now we've moved out of project mode. It's kind of thinking how we would implement that into like BAU, our normal work. And definitely things for us to consider there. One of the questions that came through the chat was about new members of the team. So probably a lot of people have started new jobs through the lockdown. Have you come across that? Any difficulties and tips around integrating new people in?
Yeah, absolutely loads. So I was working with a team yesterday. There were a team of 13 and 6 of them have never met each other. So they've all been working very distantly. Do you know what though? I did find an incredible amount of cohesion, and I'll tell you why, because I think we were working under a bit of a myth in some respects that we had really good onboarding. Because honestly, even in award-winning companies, I'm yet to see what I would call the stellar, standout, platinum standard onboarding. So I think we've now sort of started to pay more attention to what people need in certain parts of the onboarding process. And actually, I think people have moved onboarding a little bit further than it used to be. It used to be when you arrive, this is what happens. We've now moved it back a bit and said, look, we've contracted with you. Here's a way you can start to meet the team, learn about this, watch this, access that. So they've opened up learning management systems. They've brought more social chats into the mix. And honestly, I have seen people who've said, blimey, actually, I thought it was going to be awful, but actually it was my best onboarding experience because it was smaller, manageable chunks. I didn't get like 3 days talking heads and a kind of brick thrown at my head about stuff I need to know from day one. Now, I'd like to think that moving forward, we keep the best of that and bring the social cohesion and the contact stuff. So if anything, if you have got high degrees of volume on recruitment, then I think you can start to continue to do what you do. And I think, when can we bring them together and how, and integrate with the team and work on something really creative and bond them at the earliest possible opportunity. So I think that's the thing that's missing, the social bonds, the serendipitous conversations, and people have had to work quite hard at that. And I think we can make it easier coming out. But I've been surprised, actually, that I haven't heard horror stories on induction. Quite the opposite. I've heard some real positives.
If I can just add to that as well, Perry, I was just going to talk about a couple of the practices that we've implemented at Pthr, which could certainly be done in a hybrid capacity. So one of them is the establishment of our paired working, or we call it business partnering. So it's where we work really closely for half of the year with another member of the team, and then we rotate that. And that certainly helped us form closer bonds. And it's a way of sort of sharing pressures, but celebrating each other's successes. And I find that to be really effective. And of course, it's used in other organizations. Menlo Innovations, a US-based software company, for example. And also you spoke about the spontaneous conversations that lead to sort of an exchange of information that you can't necessarily replicate online. And I think they're called water cooler conversations, but certainly there is that level of transparency that's needed, you know, in your daily check-ins when you're working digitally, just being able to be a bit more open about your workload. And the social channels are really important as well.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, it's like having a buddy for the whole year, isn't it? Yeah.
We found that working with FutureGov, you know, that was a whole relationship built online. And, you know, I didn't think those kind of things would be possible. But when I guess it was a very intense project over a short period, you know, relationships were built there that will probably, you know, meeting online and will last outside of the, you know, the virtual world. So it definitely is possible to do that. I think some people maybe are more inhibited online or not as expressive. I guess it depends on the team setup, the personal setup.
Yeah.
Now, one of the questions was about manufacturing companies, and I guess this hybrid approach, does it work for every different type of company and sector? So like manufacturing, if you're on a production line, maybe it's a little bit different.
So a couple of thoughts on that. My neighbour actually works on setting up massive high volume production lines. He used to work at Ulpro, you know, the kind of non-dairy manufacturer. And he did a lot of that from home. He would program his machines and he would calibrate their working from home. And then he would go in to do repairs and work with the team and make sure the logistics side was. So you can do it with technology being where it is. But of course, people working on lathes and people doing carpentry and stuff, of course, you can't really do that remotely until perhaps robots become part of our sort of deployment techniques. So the second answer to that is what I've seen, and so I saw it in a dairy, I saw it in printers, is that people have recognised those proximity-based people and the home-based people were further apart than they had ever been before, and they weren't happy about it. So actually what they did is they didn't completely reconstruct their organisation, but they grouped people differently. They said, look, you don't work on the same accounts and you don't work on the same thing. We're not going to group you functionally, but we're just going to create like a group for you. And the printing company is based out near Peterborough, and they use the Harry Potter house analogy, so Gryffindor or whatever. So they had printers and designers and salespeople and researchers who still did their own job, but they formed a little social kind of bubble, I suppose. And what they found is that actually uptick productivity, uptick creativity, people felt more engaged. So actually you can almost create not an artificial, but just a different way to connect people. Because I worry that people who are making all the choices to work flexibly permanently, and then people who have no choice will start to resent those people, because it's like, well, I've got no choice, I've got to still do this. So bring them together with a different sense of, like, you know, create some camaraderie, collegiality. They can learn from each other. if there's one thing I hear a lot of when I'm out in clients, it's like, I work in this silo and I have no idea what they do in that silo, and they find it difficult to engage with them about their problems because of that. And I'm not suggesting we drop core work in favour of work safaris internally, but just create the connections, share the stories, get to know each other. That stuff I think will help. Yeah.
Do you think it is, does it make it more important or less important in terms of being able to measure success or measure output? You know, how do you, when we talk, you know, in the agile environment with, you know, like digital side, no one tends to talk about the outputs or measuring that. It's all about the process. Are the outputs still important to be able to measure that?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, so and probably more outcomes than output. So not just the volume of, but the impact you have. So Kirsten opened by saying that's what she does in our organisation as a chief impact officer. It's like, not just do we deliver on time, but what's the impact? What's the value and the kind of residual buzz that we leave people with? I think that's crucial. So I've been aggregating some research about what's next in the world of work and for HR professionals to think about. And the top ranked, almost like focal point, is performance analytics and value creation. We, I think, need to get better at knowing what is value and how do we perform, for two reasons. One, so that we know we've got our systems tuned really well in the way you're describing, but also, is that at the detriment of people's well-being? And we batter in people, you know, like the Goldman Sachs first year intake, who were doing 120 hours. But we batter in people, and so we're just almost like, you know, throwing them away when they're tired. Or actually, are we taking care of them? And there was an HBR article again only recently that said the more you look after people, the more likely your productivity will continue to sustainably lift. And I see that all the time. And it's like, why don't more companies know the balance is sustainable performance to achieve high levels, so that you tune your systems and your people care in equal measure? Now, to your point, you can't do that without good data, good reporting, good insight, and good narrative. So I think we've got to get much better at that, especially if we're going to have dispersed workforces. And we need to report that to people so they sit in their room knowing they contribute to something that's really powerful, really good for the company, and is going to keep them in the survival mode for the future. So I think we're all going to get a bit geeked out on performance because we need to. We don't want that monotonous hum of mush I talked about.
Yeah. Lots of, obviously, people in the chat saying they are all looking at hybrid working and doesn't feel right to just go back to how it was before. John makes the point about like co-working spaces. He's an architect, and you know, if his requirements are a really powerful machine and a big wide screen, then that might struggle in certain co-work space if it's not designed especially for those sort of technologies.
No, to John's point though, wouldn't it be nice if the architectural industry actually combined and said, look, we're going to create a co-working space where there are specialist machines if we need to. So it's almost like those demands have never been thought about by institutions that sit on top of that profession. So, you know, you kind of think, well, now's the time. Now's the time to show you add value and listen to me. Because I'd love to have a local place where I know I've got high secure and high powered equipment. That means I can get out of my own space and create that separation. So yeah, John, I don't know whether it's worth lobbying any professional body. Oh yeah, they did that in Bristol. He said 30 years ago. There you go. See, I knew this stuff was not new. So thanks, John, for sharing that. But I think this is a time when institutes like Institute of Directors, Chartered Management, they've all got their chance to step into this and kind of go, right, now we're going to add value to you. But I think we might need to lobby them and get them to understand what we really need. Yeah.
There's one question around mixed meetings in the office. So yeah, we've done that a little bit, where you've got people in the office, outside of the office having a meeting. Any tips on sort of technology that you've seen or you might be using for that?
It's not great. Let's start with that point. So I think maybe there's something about how you control that meeting environment. So if you've only got one or two people who are remote and then say 6 people in the room, do not let the 6 people in the room control that meeting, because they will by nature just forget those people on screen. So give the people on screen the control. Make it much more about relay contribution, so everybody get a chance. Don't just whoever talks the loudest and is the most exhibitionist drive the meeting. Be really, I guess, concerted in the way you stage manage contributions, not that people feel suppressed, but that you do it in a fashion that works. I had to facilitate a really tricky conversation with the management team, and I knew they all had different views on it. So I deliberately said to them, look, relay, you go first, then you, then you, then you. And it stopped them talking over each other and the CEO being the dominant force. So I think these are some of the social tricks that perhaps date back to tribalism that we might need to bring back in. But yeah, give control to the remote people, even if they're perhaps a bit junior, coach them and help them lead that meeting. But if they're predominantly in the room, don't let them run it, is what I'd say.
And Perry, people in the room, I find will work with clients actually participate less, because it's that group mentality, whereas the people that are on screen by themselves are participating more. So yeah, certainly the management of the situations.
If you have to do it, you can't avoid it. You have to do it. But yeah, think carefully about the flow and contributions.
Yeah, Emma said that's a trick from Nancy Klein's from Time to Think. Was that on your slide there, Perry, earlier?
It's not on my slide earlier, but last Tuesday we had a Time to Think practitioner, Meg, come and teach us a lot more about this, who's worked with Nancy. So thanks, Emma, for that contribution. But exactly that, value the thinking space. I mean, Jeff Bezos apparently has people write stuff down before a meeting gets going so that they think clearly and coherently. I quite like that. But I think we've been mismanaging meetings for years and we're still not doing it very well remotely. And I think we've got a chance to really sharpen that up. Yeah.
What about the etiquette in meetings? So when it used to be even face-to-face meetings, people would be on their phones in meetings and things. Obviously now, virtual meetings, and even when you're working collaboratively, people can be multitasking in lots of ways, not necessarily focusing. Anything around that? Is it just like a free-for-all, or is it just manners as usual?
Yeah. So I think the radical me says that if you're in a meeting and it's not interesting or useful enough that you are drifting into multitasking and stuff, I'd rather people fess up a bit and go, honestly, I'm out, because I'm not contributing here and I'm not picking anything up. Of course, they might miss some of that osmosis stuff. So I'm not just saying that's an absolute. But in the company I worked in a few years ago, I did introduce the law of 2 feet, where if within 10 minutes of an hour meeting, you couldn't see why you were there, you could just get up and walk away. And what that did was that made people who were hosting those meetings a little bit more attuned to the fact that they could suddenly be sat in an empty room. So the value of a meeting, I think, is obviously where you bring it into play. But yeah, I think you're right, Richard. I think there's a genuine sort of return to courteous ways of being. But I also think people can name some of these things, which is like, I've sat here for 5 minutes, we've been talking about something, we haven't decided it, I haven't contributed it, where's this going? I think we probably need a bit more of that provocative input. Takes guts, especially if like a senior leader's running that meeting. But if a senior leader's running that meeting and he's got people distracted and doing their emails, that's not a very good meeting, in my view.
Yeah. I think there's definitely something around managing your calendars a lot more, isn't there? It's so easy now to drop meetings in, just on the fly. So I think you have to build that time and space in. People
literally are hijacked by their calendars, and that's not right. I mean, there's some people I know, Penny Pullen's worked remotely for years, a bit like me. She said, never put a meeting on the hour, always on 5 minutes past, because you will either overrun or you need a break. And I think that's just a great practice to get into. And default them to 15, 30 or 45 minutes, never go an hour unless you really need it. I think we can get better at those shorter, punchier, much more focused inputs, which I think then gives us a chance to then say, can we just have a social chat? There's no agenda, there's no action. I just need to know how you are, what's going on and who's doing what, because I think we missed it.
Yeah, just lastly, John mentions about the Northampton shoe factories. They started in the bottom of people's gardens. Things like that, at home. If you think about, Apple and Microsoft, they started in the garages. So kind of going full circle.
It could be, so if you look at some of the statistics on stock and organization, so we've got some of the highest IPOs ever in the history of organization. So like, companies going public, like Zoom and stuff, off the scale. In contrast to that, a lot of people have looked at the machinery of work and gone, I'm not safe in this space. I might as well go and do my own thing. And I think we'll see a little rise of artisan craft stuff, I think. And so John's right. I mean, lovely to think Northampton could rediscover some of its shoemaking past with real connoisseur type stuff, real craftsmanship, because I think we'll value that. I think we're almost getting to the point where we're over a lot of mass-produced crap and we want good stuff that lasts. So John's point, brilliant, about factories turning into little cottage industries. Love to see that.
Brilliant. Well, that's the hour up. That's flown by. I really appreciate your time, Perry and Kirsten, to take out of your day to put that presentation together. Loads of great interaction on the chat. As I said earlier, we've recorded the session, so we will put that up onto YouTube later and email around the slides that Perry's done. So thanks for everyone for your engagement there. please do look out for future Digital Northampton events. June the 18th is our annual Tech Expo event. So it is online, probably one of our last major online events. We will be doing like hybrid events after that and looking to move back into the university for some events. But everything's online for June the 18th. So check out the website there through digitalnorthampton.com. And yeah, just thanks again, Perry and Kirsten. Really appreciate your time and input.
Thank you.
See you all later.
Good stuff. Ciao for now. Bye.
Bye.